Okay, everybody, let's kick off the meeting. This is the design review board for the Corda Testnet, and today's focus is the vision and requirements for Testnet. Nick Arini, who's the product manager in that space, is going to be the main presenter today, and we've also got Clinton Alexander, who's the technical designer in support of Testnet. So over to you, Nick.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining and making the time for us today. So we'll get straight on with it. We might have another couple of people joining. So actually, we could get through this relatively quickly. There's not a huge amount of content, so we won't keep you if we don't need to. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So that's great. Thank you. We'll start with a quick roundup of the objective of what this testnet isn't for. A bit of background and goals around Testnet, you know, what the history is, where we ended up, where we are today, and what the goals of the project are. Focus a little bit on the user journeys and some of the non-use cases, and what the alternatives to Testnet might be and when it might be appropriate and when it may not. And then we've got a small number of technical decision points that we would like to get some feedback on from the group and ideally make a decision on today. I think that should be doable. To get straight on with it then, the objective of the DRB today, we want to really validate that the roadmap that we have, the vision that we have for Testnet is actually meeting the market need, the customer need. So we definitely want feedback from externals to make sure that we are actually moving in the right direction with this. We'd like to validate some of the user journeys and then potentially even expand that list if people have other ideas of what this may or may not be used for. We've called compare the alternatives and agree on the decision points. Non-objectives for today is around specific implementation. So Clinton, the architect, is here with us, but we do intend to come on a follow-up maybe in a few weeks' time to focus on the specific technical implementation. So, you know, for quick questions we can try and cover, but any sort of detailed technical discussion can wait for that, I think.
Okay, just a quick one. For those of you who just dialed in rather than using GoToMeeting, we sent out a copy of this presentation about an hour or so ago, so you should be able to follow through on that if you go.
Okay, so we'll just start off with a little bit of background and context. So I think this should be apparent to everybody here by now, is that Corda operates in the context of a network. It doesn't really make sense outside of the context of a network. Nodes need to talk to other nodes to do anything useful. And a Corda network, you know, it's defined really by a set of common protocols that are agreed on by everybody. And there's a whole bunch of different dimensions from network parameters to an identity scheme to common notaries. There's a bunch of protocols, parts of the protocol, if you like, of Corda that define that everybody has to be in agreement with to be sort of considered to be within the same network. The end state vision for Corda that Richard has articulated recently is one of the global interoperable, you know, a single global interoperable Corda network. You know, having multiple business networks operating within, interoperating within each other in a global context. That's really, you know, we think the most valuable end state for Corda as a system. That's really what we're trying to work towards. And so, you know, the testnet is intended to be a stepping stone towards that. We want that to be a stepping stone towards the full Corda vision. We want it to support the development of the ecosystem. We have had testnets before. People who've been around for a while will remember various testnets. These tended to be version specific because prior to wire stability in version 3 of Corda, we weren't able to do what we're proposing to do now. So this is really the key technical enabler of a long-lived network which can tolerate different versions of Corda at the same time without, you know, any kind of communication issues. Or future compatibility issues. So that's really the technical enabler, the reason we're doing this now. We haven't sort of been able to do this previously. So that's all sort of the background around, you know, how we've ended up with the notion of a Corda testnet at this particular point in time. And specifically the goals for testnet, I mentioned one already. So the two are really around, first one's around ecosystem development. We want to provide the Corda ecosystem with a focal point for the development and promotion of applications and services built on the platform, and we really want to drive the increase of the user base of Corda users. You know, that's in everybody here's interest to have more people using Corda and a bigger user base. But we also wanted to take the opportunity to look at the usability, you know, particularly for first-time users, for relatively new users to the platform. We want the barrier to entry to be almost zero. We want people to be able to get started, understand the power of Corda and how it can be used in different applications. And so we really wanted to spend some time taking the opportunity to focus on reducing the friction of immediately getting up and running on a Corda network, with a provisioned node. And so some effort's gone into that as well on our side too. So those are the key goals of the project. So I mean, really, it's kind of the most questions around this have come up with what is Corda Testnet for? What is it intended for, and what isn't it intended for? So I've got a handful of use cases here. I think in the documents that we sent around earlier, we fleshed these out a little bit more. But these are really the key use cases. And then the next slide, I've got some sort of non-use cases of this where it's not really intended or would not be a good fit. I'm sure this isn't the sum total, but it gives you a good example of the kind of things that we're thinking about this being useful for. So it's called a testnet. You have to call it something. It's obviously got uses beyond just testing, and it doesn't obviously support all the different possible types of testing you might want to do on when you're developing maybe a Corda application. But it is a pretty good fit for multi-party testing. So when you have multiple participants, they're in different potential geographic locations. You want to be able to quickly coalesce around the testing of an application in that kind of scenario. You don't want the overhead of setting up a lot of infrastructure to run tests like that. Then it would be a good fit for that kind of scenario. Again, proof of concept. Again, these typically, certainly the ones we've been involved with, always involve multiple independent parties that have to coalesce around some kind of network infrastructure. The third one's a little bit different. It's more to do with sort of hands-on learning and training. You may be new to the technology. This speaks more to the usability aspect, getting up and running quickly and taking away some of the complexity to get started. The fourth point there, long-lived demonstrations or live demonstrations. You can imagine scenarios like sales scenarios where you want to be able to run the same demonstration day in, day out, on an ongoing basis. So you need some kind of long-lived infrastructure to maintain. It would be a good fit for that. And then the last two sort of go together a little bit. If you have Oracle services or Notary services, you need to be in a position to be able to as the owners of those services or the sellers of those services, putting them out there to a larger pool of users and being able to have access to them and demonstrate them, build code apps against them and test against them. Those we think are all reasonably good fits for a testnet. So I'm sure there are more, and we'd love to hear from the group as to what additional cases you think might be useful, or especially if there are use cases that you think would be a good fit for testnet that may require additional requirements to be fulfilled by the platform as we develop it and take it forward. That would be a very, very useful thing to know about.
So guys, if you have any comments now, then please put forward. If something occurs to you as we start to go through some more detailed stuff back on the original use cases, just please add them to the chat. We will pick those up and we'll answer them as we go.
Or the main list.
Yeah. Should we add to that performance work testing? Just a reference.
So actually, if you move to the next slide here, so things that we think may not be good cases.
Okay, non-use cases.
So I mean, so performance testing is an interesting one. It depends what you're testing, right? If you want to test the performance of an application in something that is approximating a realistic, messy, real-world scenario with network latency and other things that are outside of your control, then yes, that might be a very good fit. If you want something that's a very controlled environment where you're in control of every parameter, then it probably is not a good fit for that kind of scenario. So again, like I tried to articulate a few different cases of testing here, to highlight that there are things that are potentially in and out of scope for this. So it's not misleading. But obviously, testing can be many, many different things, and is almost unique to the specific application and scenario and point in development. So it could be, but it may not be.
Yeah, so basically, if I hear what you say, real life like performance testing might be okay for a particular application. However, raw or maximum controlled performance or theoretical performance, maximum performance testing might not be the good place. right?
Correct.
Yeah. So for example, the notary cluster that's supported by Testnet will have limited capacity, and obviously you're dependent to some extent on what everybody else on Testnet is doing at the time and how that might impact your performance. So you just have to take those things into account if you want to do that type of testing.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Hey there. Quick question. This is Patrick. Can I assume that security testing is also out of scope?
So that's a bit hard to answer. Again, I think it may be dependent on exactly what you're trying to test, right? There will certainly be some differences between this and something that you could imagine as a production Corda network around security. Particularly because we are intending to relax constraints around identity, for example. So you can imagine this being a sort of a more adversarial environment than you might expect from a production Corda network. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on exactly what you wanted to test from a security point of view.
Sure, I appreciate that. Just a governance type question there.
Quick question on my side. Is the testnet one of these use cases would be the staging environment of the production one?
No, definitely not. So the production environment, or any production environment should have a dedicated staging environment, and again, that's a very sort of controlled thing. It's designed for one task only, which is, immediately prior to going into production, making sure everything is working fine. That is a very different use case that is out of scope from this. I can very clearly say that's out of scope for this.
Maybe
okay.
Maybe just to sort of just hammer home that point, because we debated this a lot internally. Although we talk about the Corda network, which we'll have more information on shortly, and Corda Testnet, they're the names for two distinct offerings. So Corda network, a production network with multiple applications with legal finality and like legal binding contracts and the like. And then Corda Testnet existing, if we get agreement from the DLB on this call, existing to solve these use cases. Each of those two offerings would have a collection of staging environments and UAT and sort of test environments associated with them. So what we're talking about here is an offering that behind the scenes would actually have various versions of the network and various implementations, but they exist for two distinct purposes. One's not a staging for the other.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the explanation.
Okay, so I'll just quickly move over to the slide again. There's another couple of examples of different types of testing and alternative solutions that the Corda ecosystem provides that may be more appropriate for those kind of things. But I won't dwell on those. I think you already know about those anyway. Okay, so we've got four decision points. We'll just talk through them one by one, and then hopefully we can sort of get some kind of collective agreement on the call. For these points, so we can sort of crack on and finalize the design, which we'll bring back to you. So the first decision point is around data persistence. When we envisage the Corda testnet, we envisage it as a like I said before, a long-lived environment. It's not intended to be an ephemeral environment. We believe that there is more value to be had from having something which is long-lived, where you can have some expectations of the persistence of data for a period of time. Now, that's not to say that would be, indefinite, exponentially increasing data set forevermore, right? But we do think that this needs to have persistence, and there needs to be some sort of expectations around that. Now, this obviously raises some important questions from our point of view, from an operational point of view, around SLAs particularly. This is intended to be a service that at least in the early incarnations is a service R3 provides to the ecosystem and the community. It's a free service. It's not a monetizable service, and so there is a cost to R3 of operating this, and so we need to balance the cost of that against the value it's bringing to the ecosystem and find a balance there somewhere. So that's the reason this is a relatively, I guess, important question to discuss. So, we're assuming the need for persistence to meet the requirements and the use cases that we've sort of articulated previously. If you can't expect that data is going to be here tomorrow, then that invalidates a lot of those use cases. The pros of having data persistence is, it's a closer match for how production in Corda works, how Corda is intended to work in general, and blockchains in general, actually, and that you can run sort of long-lived tests and demos. And, I guess we expect that these things wouldn't necessarily be running indefinitely, but they will certainly be running for periods of weeks, months. On the cons of that are around the operational challenges and the resource requirements that are needed to support that as a free service to the community. So I guess the recommendation that we're making, if everybody on the call agrees, and we'd love to hear from you with that assumption, is that we would persist data at the notary. I mean, as a node operator, you can keep your data for as long as you like. But at the notary, we're intending to support data retention for a year. And then if there are applications that do happen to require data and states to live longer than a year, then we're going to have to figure out a process of either spend to self or reissuance or something like that to keep the data fresh there. So I guess a couple of questions here is does the group agree with this notion of the principle of data persistence, at least for some well-specified period of time? Does a year sound of persisting data at the notary sound reasonable to everybody on the call? And then, what kind of SLAs do you expect? Because, just saying that we can keep data at the notary for a year is one thing, but keeping the notary running as an ongoing service 24/7 or whatever the SLA may or may not be, there's obviously an operational challenge for us there. And so we'd love to sort of hear what would be a reasonable trade-off here, I guess.
Just make sure I can understand the question, because if I was listening to this, I'd be thinking, well, give me everything. I want the moon, I want the stick, I want everything. I want a pony because there's no cost to me. So what are the trade-offs? Because this could go one of two ways. One is you could say, well, actually, data being persisted for a long time, does that pose any challenges for people or other people for whom the data? So when we say data, we're talking about records of spent state. For other people for whom it lasting for a year is potentially problematic, and they might need the ability to ask us to delete it, in which case we say, well, actually, the easier thing to do is just kill it every week. Or what are we saying? Are we going the other way, saying, actually, if we agree a year, we will commit never to lose data on a rolling one-year basis? Which way how are you trying to drive this to an answer?
So, I mean, we need to come to a situation where we can, either we can afford to provide this as an ongoing service to the community, on a perpetual basis, and the cost to us doesn't, become onerous to the point where we have to either prevent the service from being available anymore, or we have to start, charging money for it. That's the trade-off, I guess, right? We want this to be, we want to be able to support this as an ongoing service, and we can't do that if we take on too much liability, but we need to make sure that we're also supporting use cases, otherwise it's not a useful service to the community. So I'm sure there's a balance in there that can be had, right? But without understanding a little bit better the perspective of the users, because again, it's not in their interest to have this and get the moon on the stick and then the service just go away because we can't maintain it.
So there's always the option for those who have special notary requirements, like more than a year or less. Those who have special requirements for notary, like less than a week or more than a year, can always run their own notary as well. That's always an option on this network.
Sure.
I think one of the key points for the period will be how much storage you will need to store 1 year of data on the notary. Secondly, store all the backups that you will need to do every day and maybe every week, and well, maybe a snapshot every month, to secure the data. I think it's a key point, and if you can estimate that a year of data persistent is workable for you, so it is. But in my opinion, on a testnet environment, I think 6 months should be enough.
So on the back of that, do we need DR strategy for the testnet? In my opinion, that would be on a best effort basis, but mandatory in terms of SLA. What is the thinking around this from maybe the other participants?
What would best effort entail? Are we talking here about a few days or a week? Make the system back available? It might be okay without DR.
I would agree if we're accepting responsibility for maintaining this, and this is going to be a collaborative environment where everyone is deploying. I agree that we need to have some sort of schema in place to replicate that environment if it falls down, whatever, if you want to call that disaster recovery, or if that's just a simple snapshot that you copy everything off. I do agree that if we're going to accept responsibility for maintaining it, that we need to have some way to recover in case of an emergency. The other thing is regarding the 1 year timeline. I agree with the 6 months. If we have some sort of, if there's some sort of automated pruning mechanism, so you have a rolling 6 months, I think that will probably cover most use cases, especially if the pruning mechanism is such that it's intelligent enough to drop things that haven't seen any use in 6 months. If that's the case, the pruning will kind of take care of itself, and that will help maintain a manageable size on the notary, I think, if that makes sense.
So one of the potential issues is, if applications are being used in test mode, it is conceivable that you get a rogue application that just generates huge numbers of transactions and dumps them on the database. So I think there's always going to be exceptions where you want to prune for reasons of that sort, just to keep it. It's not a production environment, things will go wrong, and that's something that will have to be dealt with.
I mean, there will have to be, a clear policy, with what the exceptions are and what the SLAs are, and we're looking for feedback as we develop that at this point. In terms of technology-wise, we intend this to have feature parity with sort of the latest Corda technology that's available. So we talked about the HA notary. So from that point of view, we intend it to have sort of feature parity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the SLAs can be maintained at the same level as you might expect from some kind of a full production environment. But that feedback's actually very helpful as we develop that.
I mean, specifically around SLAs, for example, would it be critical in a testnet environment to have support available at weekends? If worst case scenario, you've got some big demos running or something like that, it's really important to you and a lot of your customers. It happens to be in a country where you need to run it on a Saturday. Is that something that people envisage might be needed on a specialist request basis, or can we live with sort of UK 9 to 5 days a week for hands-on support, and people live with the environment being supported on a best effort basis otherwise?
Well, about the SLA, I think it should be a short time of downtime that is accepted, because when people will come on to Corda to develop projects and try to sell their product and to distribute it and make showcase and demo. If the network is down for more than, I don't know, a day or two, I think they will go see out there.
Would that include the weekend?
Well, I didn't think about the weekend, but maybe not.
But that's a good point, because even though I was saying best effort basis, that's bad press, right? If the network is down, you guys know that there is the tweetosphere or the tweetosphere going on, where if some guys in a garage are trying to work on a Corda app, and the network is down, it's going to be out there that it's unreliable, that there is no support and so on. Nobody can do anything about it. So I would favor very little downtime, so not in the tune of 99.99999% downtime, but maybe, I don't know, 4 hours max or whatever. I don't know what you guys think, but
I would agree with that. Be done in hours, not days. I think 4 hours is a good compromise between we don't have to monitor it 24/7, but we have to be on top of it if something goes wrong.
Yeah, at the end, the testnet will be the Windows shop. You know, it will be the first thing, the first network that they will see when they come to Corda.
I guess there's also the question of if the notary is crash fault tolerant. You know, if there's multiple parties running notary nodes, then that, you know, you have to define a distributed SLA basically, and it should be quite easy to have a good reliability.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously the intention.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just trying to, I guess, get a feeling for you know, what is reasonable and not. I mean, obviously we're not intending to just leave it in a broken state.
Well, here's a question, I guess, maybe to help think that through. If somebody was, so given the list of things you said it was going to be potentially used for, one of them was for people possibly with a business network operator or a vendor to be able to test an application and evaluate it. I guess, would the expectation be if somebody was using it for that non-production use, but still commercially important because they're trying to give a good experience to a potential client or demonstrate something to the market, would the expectation be they would need to inform the testnet operator that this was happening, or that the testnet should be run to a degree of robustness that we wouldn't need to know because it just works and they wouldn't have to worry about or knowing about it?
I mean, obviously, ideally the latter.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the comment that was made that this is going to be their first experience, and if they're using this as a demo environment, I think that requiring notification that, hey, I'm scheduling a demo for time X is going to be one of those, it's objectively not a big deal, but I think it's going to be one of those minor irritations that discourages adoption, because if that's a requirement, I think that will be an irritant to people trying to do demos for production, or trying to do proof of concept demos and getting approval to move to a production implementation of something. Just my opinion, though.
Yeah, no, it's why I asked the question, Clay, because I think you're right, and I think that points us. I mean, we won't necessarily get there from an operational perspective on day one, but if it's almost like, whereas the data persistence is a decision that I think we need to take to this group, I think the SLAs for the service itself, I think they're implied unambiguously by the vision statement. So if people buy into the vision statement, it may actually be the case we don't need to debate the SLAs because they're implied in anything.
I think your point was the right one, right? Just because it's non-production use doesn't mean it's not commercially important.
Exactly.
So I think, you know, we need to consider this. You know,
if people agree that list of vision statements is the right list. Yeah.
Sort of as a tangential, just so I don't forget it, and it's out there. It seems like most of the non-use case type of situations tend to revolve around the fact that this is a collaborative environment, and anything that hurts that collaborative environment is like, for example, load testing. You don't want to try and bring the entire network down because everyone else is also using this for demos, right? Same thing with some type of security testing and that kind of stuff. I think if we use that as an outline in there, then that would give a pretty good guideline of what you should and should not use Testnet for. And I think that it would really behoove R3 as the maintainers of Testnet to have some sort of circuit breaker or throttling on that, just in case somebody, I don't know, typos in a script or maliciously decides they're going to try something like load testing and bring the entire net down. We have a way of preventing that in an automated fashion.
That's a good idea. Thank you. Okay, shall we keep an eye on the clock? Shall we move on to the second decision point, unless there are any more comments on the first one?
What was it? Was there a conclusion on the first one, or does it...
So I think the conclusion I heard was that we were in general agreement that data persistence as a principle, 6 months is a good horizon of window time to look at, and that we need to take the comments into consideration as we put together an SLA, which I guess when we've got, we can bring back to the group, or at least, doesn't need to DRB, but maybe we can send it around to the mailing lists, just to clarify, but we've got some work to do on the SLA. That's what I heard. Getting nods around the table, great. Okay, so the second decision point around auto-generation of distinguished names in the node.conf. So a little bit of background to to sort of the proposed technical implementation of this. We talked a little bit about usability up front. One of the things that we wanted to do was have a very seamless way of onboarding people onto people or nodes, provisioning nodes onto the Testnet environment, and we wanted to do that without there being a sort of a manual approval step in the way that there is with the the normal way you would join, make a certificate signing request from a node to a doorman, which has a manual approval step in the middle that could take hours, days, potentially. We wanted this to be an instantaneous experience, and that's one of the things that we looked at, relaxing this constraint of the strong identity at the distinguished name level in order to make that onboarding process seamless. So bringing that in as an assumption, we do auto approvals, we auto sign certificate requests, we actually proxy certificate requests through a web application to get this instant node provisioning. You can go to a web application, you sign up, and you can download your node, or you can download a script which will install a node for you directly without having to go through that approval process. But one of the outcomes of that is we looked at auto-generating distinguished names with a random string rather than allowing a user-specified distinguished name. So there's a number of reasons for this. One, we wanted to minimize the amount of user input, the chance of mistakes, failure to provision because of duplications, because of this constraint of uniqueness at the point of the doorman database, and so we sort of looked at this as a design pattern, if you like, auto-generating the distinguished names, so we don't allow the user to specify the domain name, distinguished name, sorry. There are some side benefits of that. So one is that it gives you a much stronger privacy on the testnet and sort of regulatory, GDPR safe. We're not putting, there's no risk of putting user data in the network map or in the node.conf. And it also avoids the needs for checking for abuse or having to remediate abuse or mistakes or name squatting or bad language or any of these other kind of things because of this auto approval, and there's no sort of manual approval step. It just sort of neatly sidesteps all of those kind of problems. The cons, of course, are that people like human readable names. Some applications that we've seen actually require business logic even, sort of considered to be a bit of an anti-pattern to put business logic into your distinguished name, but that has happened in the past. But nonetheless, there are some applications which do require identifiable names, human readable names in the node.conf. So that would be a con. And so this is somewhat of a there are pros and cons, and one side of the table is on one side of the fence, the other side of the table on the other side of the fence. So we'd love to get some feedback from the community as to where how important is this one way or the other. Do you agree with the benefits or the limitations? Should we potentially offer? I mean, the middle ground here is that you could do both. So by default, you get an automated name, but there is a process you can go through for having a human readable, at least partially in this process. So that's a possibility here. But yeah, we'd love to get some feedback on that.
So this item is actually the one I touched upon when I said provisioning of nodes in my answer to Richard. So if there is a good way, and I guess maybe auto-generation of the names, it might be a good way of doing this. That's what I had in mind, and I'm pretty in favor of making it as simple as possible and as immediate as possible for new joiners, instead of having to deal with the operational burden of having someone approve and provision the new nodes.
So hi Fred. So just for those who may not have seen your email, if I remember correctly, it was late last night that I read it. I guess you proposed two things. One was you were saying, as you just said, you think it's important people should be able to request or specify their own name. The way you proposed it was by self-generation of certificates, which will leave to one side here. And your comment was, let people select, and if it then turns out retrospectively they've misbehaved, we revoke. So it's like we trust, but then we yeah. Was that the concept?
So yeah, so I was less. I mixed several things. The underlying thinking was about auto provisioning of I don't know what I wrote, but the idea was to make the provisioning of nodes as simple as possible. I might have wrote choosing their names, but I agree that there is tons of problems with choosing if you want to ensure uniqueness, and you could have a collision of names, and surely you don't want that. So I found that the proposal here might be better. And then I was envisioning a situation where you could have people trying to provision some nodes and be malicious about it, and thinking about a way to exclude nodes and unprovision or revoke certificates of nodes if they behave wrongly. And I don't know what we can do about it. There were two or three items.
But just to be clear, the ability to sort of choose one's own name instead of having it auto-assigned does not impact the ability for an immediate issuance of certificate or signing of certificate request. I mean, that's a separate issue, and we're saying for Testnet,
choosing name is about the collision, I guess, right?
It's just about the collision. Well, collision, and I don't think it's stated here, but something that I know the team worried about, and maybe it's not a real worry, something they worried about was the potential for abuse. So if someone provisions a node that either is just Natixis, or somebody provisions a node that is, Natixis is the worst bank in the world, would we be happy having that on the testnet? And maybe we don't care. Maybe it's fine. This is just a testnet.
But my challenge there, Richard, is I can create a domain.
Yeah,
a website called Natixis is the worst bank in the world.
Come on, stop this, guys. You have to stop this.
I think there are existing mechanisms to deal with that. Yeah, including Natixis' expert team of lawyers.
Now, I think the proposal, the last one of Nick was maybe the right way to go with this. I mean, auto-generate names so that the newcomers can deploy instantly his node, and if someone needs to have a proper name on the node, then he should agree to maybe spend 1 day or 2 days to have some of the documents review and waiting for a few days that R3 validate the documents with the name.
Well, the other point I was going to make was
I feel like in this regard, testnet should act the same way as the production network. Like if someone is demoing an application and maybe they're using the common name in some part of the application, maybe not to display, but maybe for some other reason. Despite Nick suggesting it's an anti-pattern, if people decide to do that because this is how they expect the production network to behave, then they have a problem if they deploy it to the testnet and demo it and it doesn't work.
So just to be clear, the anti-pattern was putting business logic in, not just having a name there. So having some kind of qualification to the name. So,
but I think the real, thinking back, why the whole concept of a common name was to be human readable, wasn't it, at some point, and recognizable. I guess to me it inherently feels odd that ability is taken away in testnet. So maybe it's not a sign. Maybe it has to be overwritten. But I think the ability to specify it is still kind of important.
For abuse, I mean, if someone registers an abusive name, we can just be notified asynchronously and drop them from the network map like a few hours later, right? Just trigger an email. So what's thinking of like Minecraft versus Lego World, where Lego got stomped because they were worried too much about abuse.
Okay, so what's because obviously there's an operational. So the other advantage of this, which I guess is not specified, is just giving out random identifiers removes any kind of manual work on the part of R3. Now the proposal just made by Corda 2, sorry, I don't know who that was fine. Somebody can retrospectively ask to be given a real one, and then we'll review the docs. But of course, there's a mountain of effort and detail involved in reviewing the docs, which is part of the the main Corda network offering. But there's an implication of some manual step. The alternative is the one Mike's outlined, which is just assume good faith, let people request whatever they want, and if we discover it in a spot check or someone complains, then we go and review. But in both cases, there's a manual process. Like, the only question is which one is the most scalable or the one that's
post hoc review, I'm sure. We can just have a Slack bot that dumps, so-and-so joined the testnet into a channel and keep an eye on it.
Mm-hmm. So I have one question then. If we revoke a name, can someone then reuse it? Just say I went on the network and joined up as R3 LTD and took that node, and then I let's say wasn't here anymore for some reason, hit by a bus. Could R3 then get that node back if it was gone? If I was gone, sorry.
Well, if it's an offensive name, we don't want to.
Well, not offensive. As long as sign up to take HSBC or or something.
You just have to. I guess you could even. you just have a rule that says don't take existing trademarks, and if you do, we'll catch you later and follow up and give you. And
I think with that happens and we revoke it because the certificate's been revoked, but it doesn't mean that the X500 name has been blacklisted for all time.
No. So we can just say, okay, this name, add it to our list of names that won't appear in the network map. We just drop them, and we say, when you pick a name, Bank of Breakfast Tea. That's where.
My actual problem is what they want if the real owner of that wanted to get back again.
Maybe we just say, even if you're the real owner, you don't get to use your trademarks on the testnet, just to keep it simple. And to stop people imitating each other.
But does that kind of counter the point, though, of people wanting to demo this with the real-looking names, which kind of defeats the point of giving people...
We have demo bench and all the other things for doing robust demos with, names you want and no need to rely on Wi-Fi connections and all that stuff. So I don't know, maybe, but Otherwise we go down the route of, well, now we need ID verification for testnet as well, and then that's the whole point. We want it to be easy.
Okay, so we've only got 10 minutes left, so we've got 2 more points. So
I'll give you quickly any other views on the call. So we heard from 2 people, but I don't know anyone else feels strongly. Maybe Clay, I'm going to put you on the spot because you were talking about the importance of being able to do demos and the implication of the availability on that. If all your demos had nodes with random strings as their names, is that something that you live with? It's fine, or does the demos need to have at least human recognizable names, even if they're not the actual trademarks?
In my opinion, I think for a minimal entry bar, I think automating the process of generating the names when they're registered is probably the way to go. I don't think that having human readable X500 names is something that should affect the demo. Let's be honest. I mean, it's just a string that identifies this particular node, right? If I need a demo and I actually for whatever strange reason, decide I need to display the name of this node, I can jury rig that in the demo. I can hard code something that looks appropriate. It's just a demo, right? I don't see any overbearing production need, especially if you're talking about using the X500 name as an anti-pattern. If you're using that to trigger business logic, I don't see any need to have a human readable name in that sort of environment. I mean, even in a production environment for maintenance of a business use, it's going to be easier to have all that on the.
Well, okay. When we say using it in business logic, I mean, the idea is that, applications can look at the network map and list all of the parties that, just take the information there and then just list all of the human meaningful names from it. If you say, like, who do I want to make a payment to, or who do I want to start this flow with? That's why they're human readable. You could do a mapping in a demo, but then you've got demo-specific code in your app, which is sort of not, I don't know, it would work.
And I do agree with you in that regard, but if I'm putting a production-ready app together and I want to automate this process, even in the real world for production, I want to automate this process as much as possible, because if I've got an enterprise class kind of application, I could be adding nodes to my network and dropping them off left and right. So if I can automate the process of generating that random name that it just gets registered with, then I can also automate the process of this random string maps to this particular human readable name and remove it entirely from a Corda infrastructure sort of standpoint, because that's maintenance of my production environment, in my opinion, anyway.
Okay.
So just to summarize, because we've got 2 points left to quickly go through in only 8 minutes. I think we're all in agreement that we do want to automate this process as much as possible. There might be something we can do to make those automated strings a little bit more readable rather than just random letters and numbers, which might help a little bit. And then maybe we'll go away and investigate whether we can also, you have your cake and eat it. So there is a process without introducing some huge operational overhead, which allows, in the cases that need it and are willing to, incur some kind of, maybe a period of approval or whatever it might be, or a post hoc approval, that we can do that as well. So, but we'll definitely go, I guess, with the auto generation. That's what I'm hearing from this in the first instance. Great. Okay. So the next one is, this shouldn't be contentious actually. It's related. This is the idea of that a user can create as many nodes as they need within this environment, possibly with some bounds, right? But certainly not sort of one user, one node kind of scenario. I think this is obviously needed for testing. There are some potential cons around maybe having lots of stale nodes, but the system we think is robust to this. Stale nodes will eventually disappear from the network map. The name clash problem can be mitigated by auto generation that we just talked about, and then network abuse. I guess that's something that can we detect it? There are mechanisms for dealing with it once you've detected it. You could suspend the account or revoke the individual nodes. So I don't see those as sort of big blocking issues. I mean, is that a contentious point, or any reason why we wouldn't want to support users to create multiple nodes from their single account?
So I can think of one which I don't think is major, but it's possible that for many people, their first experience of Corda networks will be the Corda testnet. And we need to make sure, I guess through documentation or samples, people don't form an incorrect mental model of how the platform works. So if you think about how the main Corda network is designed to work, the whole point about a Corda node is, a certificate is intended to map to a real world legal identity. You sign with the associated key, you enter into a binding contract. So if we create the perception that you can have multiple separate certificates, multiple separate keys for the same entity, that could lead to a dangerously wrong model or mental model of how the network works or how the platform works. So we just need to make sure that if we go down this path, assuming nobody else objects, we just make sure that we don't fall into the trap of misguiding people as to how they should design their real solutions.
Okay, are there any questions on the call about that one, or are we sort of just in general agreement? Okay, I shall move on. Last point You know, as we talked about previously, this is Richard's favourite. We wanted to make the process as easy as possible, and we really did sit down and think, if this was your very first experience of Corda or any kind of blockchain platform, you know, there's a lot of maybe assumed knowledge there that builds up over time, right? But if this is the very first time you were coming to this, there's a lot of quite complex concepts, and we wanted there not to be a barrier to entry. And so one of the things to look at here is we generating keys on the server and then bundling all of the bits and pieces together in your node bundle that you need. So everything is in one place. So your identity, your certificates, and your keys. So you know, the pros of that makes it a very easy, you know, usability experience. You know, the cons is it sets some poor examples for key management. You know, you know, there may be some applications where the users do need or want control of the private keys, and it obviously diverges from the experience of production Corda, because you would never ever sanction that on a production network unless you were crazy. So, you know, again, it's similar to the previous one. It's maybe a sort of a naive usability on the one hand versus you know, best practice and you know, closer to how the mainnet experience might work.
Can't we just have a toggle switch?
Yeah. So the recommendation is that we actually do both. The long and short of it, yeah. So you know, maybe you default to auto-generated with a big message saying, you know, if you want, you know, this is not best practice. This is just, you know, to make it easy. You know, big warning. Click here if you want to.
So I know Mike cover your ears, because I mean, my worry with, I guess I'll let other people speak, but my worry with this is there's a reputational danger with this. The idea of launching something that is so far from any kind of established best practice, it would just be so easy for those in the world who are not fans of Corda to point to it as an example of insanity. So,
well, it's clear in the UI that,
yeah,
if we make it really clear that we know that you would do that for real, but it's convenience for testing about.
Okay, so I was going to say, so maybe we do, you know, there needs to be some seriously sort of like, you know, seriously sort of like well signposted signal that we know. But where I was going was, okay, so if I understand it, the reason why you want to do this is because the time at which someone's going through this flow, they're accessing the flow through the user interface. They don't yet have a node that can generate its own keys. Is there no way, notwithstanding this known security vulnerabilities of browsers, there's no reason why the private key couldn't be generated in the browser, so at least it never leaves the machine?
It can be technically, except for the fact that I have a feeling some browsers have deprecated that behavior and getting rid of it.
Right. Also, the main use case, running this from your own machine is one way, but running it from the cloud is where sort of I thought of the intended experience. If any cloud templates or any scripts that we provide do this for you on the machine, we could eventually turn most of the way to do this to the cloud provider template or the script we provide. That way it's always generated from there, except if you download it from our UI directly in a zip format. So eventually we could switch to most use cases, do it locally, and then sub it to CSR.
Then you get
initially like an MVP, it would be easier to go with generating it on our servers and then providing, but over time we could move it off onto the machine.
I think there was something that came out yesterday, right, that was actually more important about this, which is, do we store, you know, should we store and allow people to get back their private keys? Which is, if we're generating them anyway, we might as well go to the next step.
It does set an even more poor example. That was my only concern with it, like you back up the keys form. But I do agree, it would be good for user experience, but poor for making it.
So here's the thing, right, so private keys are one of those, you know, they're this wonderful concept, and then people are like, oh yeah, great, I'll generate a private key for a system they don't care about yet. And then they lose it, like I did my first ever Bitcoin wallet, for example. because even though I had lots of coins in, it's like I didn't care about it, because who cared? No one was using it. So, and then, you know, we saw this problem again and again, where people start casual users and they don't practice good key hygiene because they don't care. And later they get more, you know, they get more into it, more enthusiastic. And then they're like, oh yeah, now I should probably do it properly. In which case they would just generate fresh keys. But if your first user experience of Corda is, oh, I mucked about with it a month ago and now I want to go back to it and try it again, and oh, whoops, I, you know, lost my private keys and now I'm stuffed because I didn't, well, with auto-generated names, and if there's no human meaningful identity to begin with, it doesn't matter, just generate another one.
It could be another toggle, store my keys for me.
Something like that, you know, select your security level, you know, generated for you and thrown away, generated and saved, generate your own.
Sounds like quite close to recommendation, but with slightly more work.
Yeah, well, yeah, a little bit more work. I mean, we need to keep them safe.
We do need to keep them safe, yeah. Should we let you on the call?
But that only matters if the names are worth keeping.
Agreed.
Okay, guys, we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Are there any major points that anybody would like to raise either about this or anything that they've heard so far this afternoon?
I would just second the idea that yes, we should probably provide both ways of doing it. One for this is my soft and gentle ease into my first experience, and as long as it's made clear that this is sort of the path to take to deploy your first Hello World sort of app, and this is a production level sort of implementation. As long as it's clear in that and the documentation, I really don't think there's a lot of way that they can fault Testnet for not making it clear or promoting, poor practices.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Any other comments? And if not, just like to highlight that this obviously is focusing on the vision and requirements. We plan to hold another review board probably in the first week of July, based on I think most of the discussion this afternoon has gone alongside the proposed recommendations. So that will be the technical design and giving an opportunity to actually talk about the physical implementations, and Clinton will take a lead on that one. So first week of July for the second DLB.
Will it involve a demo?
Yeah, we can do a demo. We have been building an MVP alongside the design, by the way, because the demo will happen then.
It's quite an organic process, actually, coming to.
Okay.
And the test for me about how much priority we put against this and how much resources, the number of emails I get after this DLB, but for people asking me when it's going to be live and how they get on it.
Okay, then, well, thank you very much for joining us. It's all really useful input. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.